Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's the end of November, meaning it's time to look at the new books of December. For those of you who might be new, the term TBR for the purpose of this video, which I film every month, means to be released and, of course, then also to be read. So, what I do is I look at the upcoming month, the new releases, and I pick a couple that I find interesting personally, and then I share them with you. And as always, we start off with general fiction. And for this month, for December, next month, because it's not yet December, but for December, I picked a debut novel. As you know, I'm always interested in trying to find new authors, and that's Kylie Reid, Such a Fun Age, which will be published at the very end of this year, the 31st of December. Kylie Reid is a Black American author with an MFA from the famous Iowa workshop. She lives in Philadelphia. Her short stories have been published in various magazines, and this debut novel centers around a theme that I personally find really interesting, fascinating, but also important. The main character, you have two main characters of the book. The one is Alex Chamberlain, a successful white woman she started as a blogger, but now she's, this kind of blogging brand, very successful. And the other main character is the babysitter, a Black woman, 25-year-old Amira Tucker. And the story the plot is set around an incident when Amira takes one of the children of Alex to the mall, and then she is stopped by the police and accused of kidnapping a white baby, because what other reason would a young Black woman have to, be accompanied by a white child? And if you're following the news, things like that actually happen. So I understood that the story is fiction, of course, but it's based on events that unfortunately really happen. I'm not only interested in debuts, like I said, but I was also gripped by the premise of this story. The relationship between a successful white woman and her babysitter, the racial relationships, but also how the story will develop, because obviously, from what I read, Alexis then tries to make things right, quote unquote, and help Amira, but it's doubtful whether Amira really appreciates this, and then something comes up from Amira's past and that ties the two women together. So it sounds a little bit like maybe there's a mystery element to it. And you know me, I always like that. If a book has a mystery element to it, I thought it sounded really interesting. Of course, like with all the books I always discuss on the TBR, I haven't read them, so I don't know whether they are any good. I can just say that I find what I read about the book interesting. So my first pick for December's TBR, Kylie Reid's Such a Fun Age. Next, we move on to nonfiction, and for December, I picked a memoir. You know how I love a good memoir. At least if you're following my channel, you know that memoir are one of my favorite nonfiction books. And for December, I picked Peggy Wallace Kennedy's book, The Broken Road, which will be published on the 3rd of December. Peggy Wallace Kennedy is the daughter of former Alabama Governor George Wallace, a segregationist. I mean, the father, not the daughter. Segregationist, full of hateful rhetoric. And one of the central themes at least that's what I understood, how this memoir opens, is an incident in 1963 when Peggy herself was a young girl, and her father, George Wallace, tried to block two African-American students from entering the university. The book is about the relationship between Peggy and her father, and also about the George Wallace's not only hateful rhetoric while he was a segregationist and former governor, but obviously, something I didn't know, he denounced his views later in life. The subtitle of the book is George Wallace and a daughter's journey to reconciliation, because obviously, from as far as I understood, Peggy didn't agree with her father's views. So this is a memoir that, as some people say, ticks all the boxes for me. A father-daughter relationship. I'm always interested in that. I'm interested to read more about racial issues in the US, not only in the 1960s, but later on. I find the theme that somebody who was such a prominent segregationist figure later denounced his views. I'm interested in learn about that. So no wonder, I would say, that Peggy Wallace Kennedy's book, The Broken Road, made the December TBR for nonfiction. Next up is translated fiction. And for this, I picked Annette Hess, The German House, translated from the German by Elisabeth Laufer, which will be published on the 3rd of December. I haven't read the German original, which came out last year. So I will probably read it in German and not in the translation. Sorry about that. The book is not only translated fiction, but also historical fiction. It's set against the backdrop of the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials in 1963, where people involved in Auschwitz were put to trial, finally, almost 20 years after the war ended. So it's not the Nuremberg trials that happened right after the war, but the national trials that faced a lot of adversity in Germany at the time, that a lot of people in Germany thought, well, let the past be the past. So anyway, the main character is a translator, Eva Bruns, who is 24, so she was born in 1940, which means the war and the atrocities that the Germans committed, she was born already, but she, of course, didn't really, experience them consciously. She was only 3-4 years old. Eva is asked to become a translator for these trials. And that also starts a confrontation with her parents and her husband-to-be. I know I discussed it with some other booktubers with whom I read books, Mel, Amelia, all these new German books about the war and the aftermath of the war and Auschwitz and the Holocaust. I know, but still, somehow I found this particular premise interesting, especially because it touches upon a theme that always, keeps me thinking, and that is, what do you do if you find out that your parents or loved ones or family were involved in something that is not good? So that gripped me, I think, for this book. And that's why The German House by Annette Hess made the December TBR for translated fiction / historical fiction. And finally, crime fiction. Yes, I know normally the last one is always sci-fi, but I just couldn't find a sci-fi novel published in December that really interested me. So instead of that, I will end with 2 crime fictions. I mean, I love mysteries, so instead of 1 crime fiction, 1 sci-fi, I have 2 crime fictions. Like you care. Anyway, the first of the crime fiction picks is Nalina Singh's book, A Madness of Sunshine, which will be published also on the 3rd of December. I think the 3rd is somewhat of a publication date, almost the only publication date I could find in December. Another piece of useless information. Nalini Singh is an author born on Fiji, but she lives in New Zealand. She has published previous books, fantasy, romance. I have never read her, but I'm, as you know, interested in expanding my horizon. And when I saw that a New Zealand author published a new crime fiction book, I was interested. The book is set in New Zealand, the West Coast, a small town there, which is described in the blurb as one of these towns where people know each other and neighbors are friends and the schoolmates are friends. But then one summer, um, something happened. 8 people, is it 8? I'm not sure. Some people disappeared, they vanished. So that is the premise. And then the book starts 8 years later, from what I understood, when another woman disappears, and the story takes off from there. As always with mystery or crime fiction, thrillers, I don't know. I don't want to know more than that. I don't want to know more than the premise, because I don't want to be spoiled or know too much, especially not for a mystery book. But the premise sounded interesting enough, and that together with the fact that it's a New Zealand author, and I've read shamefully a few authors from New Zealand made it that I picked this book, A Madness of Sunshine, for the December TBR. And finally, the last book and the second book in the crime category is In the Dark by Loreth and White, published on the 1st of December. So the 3rd is not the only publication date. Anyway, Loreth and White lives now in the US, but she was born in South Africa, lived also in Canada. And I read some of her previous mystery books and quite liked them. What drew me into this book is that it's a sort of a remake of Agatha Christie's famous book, And Then There Were None, published in the late 1930s. So you have 8 people in a secluded environment. This time it's a spa, and they can't go off because of the weather, and then they are hunted. Each has a secret, each has something to hide, and you know the theme of And Then There Were None. I love this book by Agatha Christie, and of course I'm a bit hesitant, because if you take such a famous theme of such a famous crime writer and such a famous novel and write a remake, you have to do a really good job. So I hope, and judging from White's previous books, I'm full of hope, but you never know. But still, the fact that somebody would do that, would dare that, was enough to interest me, and hence I picked In the Dark as the second book in the crime category for my December TBR. I'm stumbling over my words here. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, these were the books that I find interesting to be released in December. Please let me know whether any of the books interest you, or whether you have a book published in December that you are excited about. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye bye.